All right, we're in module 7 of the AMZ Affiliate Bootcamp. Lesson 3 is all about hiring and training your team. We're going to get into this. Again, my name is Justin Cook. I got my partner Joe Magnotti here, and we are both from Empire Flippers. All right, so the first question is why hire? Why does anyone hire a team? Why do they build out teams? First, you're going to have to spend money on these people. So isn't that money you could be earning yourself, right? And so, we're going to answer some of those questions and why that's valuable. But the first thing is, and I know this is cliche, but it allows you to work on your business, not in your business. So when you start out, you're the one kind of hustling, doing all of the work, the day-to-day kind of grind, and eventually you're going to want to take a step back and see the kind of the bigger picture. So there are steps here, right? The first step, you start off as a solo entrepreneur. You're the one doing the day-to-day work and doing the grind. And then once you start to hire people, and you start to hire whether it's VAs or employees, you become a manager. You're no longer doing that day-to-day work. You're managing the team that does that. And then as you hire kind of a management level or oversight level, you actually become the owner, right? So you're thinking big picture, where's the company going? You're involved in partnerships and agreements outside of kind of the day-to-day or even the week-to-week work.
Yeah, I would say those transitions are quite difficult. I mean, you touched upon one earlier, Justin, and that's the one of why should I pay for somebody to do something that I could do and just keep all the money? I mean, that was a difficult one for me to grasp in the beginning of our entrepreneurial career, especially if someone I was paying was going to wind up making more money than me, which definitely might be the case in the beginning of your business. So you have to look at these things kind of in a long-term view and see that down the line, the quantities of scale will really add up and you'll be able to build something that's bigger than a 1 + 1 = 2. It's a 1 + 1 = 4, 5, or 6 kind of situation.
Well, one of the things too is that there are really high value pieces to your business, right? So with Amazon affiliate sites in particular, niche selection and keyword research are critical. Right. So that may be a piece that you keep, that you found that you're really good at, that you provide a ton of value to the process. But setting up the domain and the hosting and WordPress and getting the content ordered and edited is not as critical. So you may keep, once you've broken it up into chunks, as we talked about in the last lesson, and we've created SOPs for this, you may keep the keyword research piece yourself. And for us, that's what we did because we found it so critical and so important to the success of the sites that we kept that for a long time. We didn't actually send that to our team, but we had them doing everything else, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that along the way, we learned every bit of the process, and that was so important, not only for being able to teach them and evaluate how well they were doing in the process, but also for some respect. I mean, it's easy for someone to come in, see that you know what you're talking about because you actually did the process, and have a little respect for you in terms of looking up to you as the manager and as the owner eventually.
All right, so the next question is, when do I hire? And we should probably talk about the 80% capacity rule, Joe. Now, the truth is, when you hire someone, there's going to be some pain, right? There's the dip of the dark before the dawn, so to speak. So 80% capacity means when you are about maxed out, you're at 80% of your total capacity is a pretty good time to hire. And the reason is you're going to need that extra 20% because it gets worse when you hire someone. You're now not only having to do the work, but you're having to train someone and bring them along and get them up to speed, which is to add even more work to your plate or more work for you to do.
Yeah, definitely. We've gone through this in our business several times, Justin, and it is a bit of a hump to get over, especially if you wind up hiring the wrong person and have to backtrack and hire again, which is definitely a possibility. But, it's something that, again, you have to look at the long-term vision of the company.
Yeah, and for anyone watching this or taking this course right now in this lesson, I think you need to understand that it's a skill set, right? So hiring and bringing on and building teams is a skill set. And if you've never done it before, it may be a little bit challenging. You may make some mistakes. I'd say the important thing to know here is that's okay, right? This is a skill that's really worth getting good at. So if you've already had some success with sites, you've got a successful process, know that it may be difficult. It may require you learning a new skill set, but in the long term, this will be very helpful for your entrepreneurial career. The second thing when you're hiring is you're not going to want to hire until you have documented processes. So we mentioned in lesson 2, we went through SOPs and how to create SOPs and why they're important. You're going to want to make sure you have those processes documented before you bring someone on, and we're going to talk about that a little further. The last piece here on when you hire, I generally say you want to hire in 2s or 3s whenever possible. And the reason for this is if I hire 2 people to do, let's say, the same job or a pretty similar job, it's a lot easier to get them up to speed, and it doesn't take twice the effort, right, Joe? So if I'm training 2 people at the same time, it's a little bit worse and takes a little bit more time than one, but not double.
Yeah, and you can also compare and contrast them, right? So you can start to say, I have a baseline here. Angie is performing better than John. Why is that? And when I look for new people to hire, I should hire more people like Angie and less people like John. So it gives you that ability when you hire more than one person. And let's face it, if you're hiring virtual assistants, it's fairly cheap. So, hiring more than one might be a good idea to get you up to capacity quite quickly.
That's a good point too, Joe, is that, you hire Angie and John. Angie might be better at setting up the sites, but John has a real affinity for ordering and editing and publishing the content, right? So you can allow them to start to specialize. Even though you hired them for the same job or the same role, you may find that one is better at a task than another, and you can kind of like point them in the direction that seems to be the best fit. So even though sometimes, Joe, we hire for a particular role, like we say, look, you're going to do site creation. We realize that person is more interested in or has more skill sets in other areas, and we allow for that, right? So we can kind of allow them to find success in something that they weren't originally hired for. And I think that's a part of just being flexible as the boss, right? As the entrepreneur that's hiring people, know that they may have different skill sets than you originally thought they did when you hired them.
Exactly.
All right, so let's talk about where to hire. You've determined, do you want to hire some people? You're in a position, you are 80% capacity, you've documented your processes, and you're ready to hire 2 or 3 virtual assistants. Where can you hire them? Well, the first thing you want to do is you want to think about the hiring process as a funnel. And what I mean by funnel is at the top of the funnel, you're going to get most of your people that are applicants, right? Most of the people that are reviewing your job ad, they haven't filled it out yet, but you're going to get a bunch of people at the top. And what you want to do is you want to narrow those down. And the best way to do that is to put roadblocks in place. And one of the ways you can do that is through forms, having them take tests, having them create videos, having them answer questions. Basically, you want to put these roadblocks in place so that you can filter out the tons of applicants you might get in the beginning down to the 2 or 3 hires that you're actually going to bring on.
I love the testing funnel. It worked really well for us, especially when you're hiring outsourcers. We used an English test, an English multiple choice test that was about 100 questions. Over time, we were able to build a baseline of people we knew were good and knew were not. About 80%. If they didn't get an 80% or higher, they weren't going to be a good hire. If they got 8% or left, they were just right out. And this was over hundreds of people having taken the test and having hired a lot of people as well. So that was a really easy baseline thing to do. Plus, the test was rather long. It took an hour for people to do. And sure, they could look up the questions online, but that was just another sign that they were willing to go the extra step to get the job.
Yeah, so the grammar test that Joe's referring to, for anything that required good communication abilities, let's say they were customer service or they were, let's say, going to be content editors, an 80% or better on this test was critical. We would go as low as, I think, 70% for people that were more technical, developers, people that were doing the site creation process. But if at all possible, having a higher score on that was super valuable. So we're going to share a link to that test so that you can kind of review the test, take the test, and get a feel for how that works. So now that you've created your funnel, you also need to look at whether you're going to be hiring high-level employees or low-level employees. And that sounds kind of bad, but what I mean by that is, are you hiring people that need to have skill sets where they can figure things out, that they're really kind of managing the process, or is this more task-based work, right? So if you're going to hire, high-level employees that require some really specific skill sets or expensive skill sets, that's going to be different, and you may use a slightly different process than hiring virtual assistants to do known tasks. So in terms of where you can post an ad, there are a bunch of different places you can use, and this is going to change over time. So I'll give you some of the ones that we use right now. I mean, Upwork is definitely a viable option. We got started actually hiring on Craigslist in the Philippines. That was helpful for us. You can also post on something like onlinejobs.ph. They've got a ton of Filipino applicants or virtual assistants that are looking for jobs there as well.
Yeah, I would just say I'm a little bit biased towards Online Jobs PH. We've had a lot of success there. You are going to have to weed through a good deal of applicants, kind of like you would with Upwork. But the nice thing about Upwork is most of the people on Upwork are looking for part-time work, hourly work. Online Jobs at PH, you can really get full-time people who are going to be dedicated to just you and you alone.
All right, man. So let's get into the hiring process, at least the first part of this. The first thing to know is that when you're putting these job ads out, you're both selling them on the job and you're using it as a weeding process. You need to maintain that balance. So you want them to be excited about applying for the job. At the same time, you want to put some steps or some barriers in there to kind of potentially trip them up. One of the ways we do that is we put things like Easter eggs, right? So in the job ad, sometimes we'll mention something like, mention your favorite Filipino boxer in the title or in the subject of the email, right? Or we'll ask them a question in the process that refers back to the original ad, and they'll have to go look that up and then put the answer in. Just something to make sure they're paying attention. A lot of times you'll have virtual assistants that are just trying to fill out like 100 of these a day. And so they're paying no attention. They're taking a shotgun approach to this and filling out as many of these as possible. And that may not be the kind of person you want to hire if they don't have any attention to detail. So that's really what you're looking for here, is attention to detail.
Yeah, the funny thing is, Justin, this is the way I used to apply for jobs when I was in my early 20s. I'd go on monster.com and just blast out my resume by filling in the same form over and over again. And you know what? If they had Easter eggs in there, I really didn't read the ad in such great detail, and they definitely would have tripped me up and not replied back to me. Probably why I didn't get hired for very good jobs back then. But yeah, I think this is a great way to filter people out, because you're not going to want people that can't pay attention to detail. If you're building these types of sites at scale, you're going to want people that are going to be detailed about the process, read your SOPs, and adhere to them. And this is a great way to weed that out.
And these little Easter eggs we use throughout the process too. Another example would be in the interview process. When we're actually interviewing them live or via Skype, we'll mention exactly what we do or something very specific about what we do, and even ask to make sure they understand it. 10, 15 minutes later in the interview process, we'll ask them to repeat back their understanding of what it is that we do or that particular process that we mentioned. And if they have no idea what we're talking about, it's just a pretty good sign that they weren't paying any attention. And if they're not paying any attention to what you're saying, that's probably going to be a problem for you in the hiring process. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the hiring funnel. As I mentioned, it is a funnel. You're going to have the most people at the very top and the least people at the very bottom. So, the hiring funnel may look something like those that are curious about the job. Maybe they're taking a look at it, and then the next level would be the ones that actually went through the application process. The next level would be the people that went through the application process that you've now looked at and weeded out, the people that didn't follow directions or didn't fill the application out completely, and now you're looking at just the qualified applicants. And then from the qualified applicants, you're going to interview those and actually select one or two or three that look like they're actually great fit applicants. So you may start off with 30 at the top that are kind of curious. You may get 15 people that actually apply. You may only have like 5 or 6 that are qualified applicants, and then 2 or 3 at the end that are great fit applicants. And we mentioned before, build in some barriers in the funnel. One of those being Easter eggs, which is just something in the ad that they have to mention in the application or in the form. You can also put forms where you're asking them questions, you're getting feedback from them. You may require them to do a YouTube video. We do that for all of our apprentice applicants. You can also require written content. especially important if you're hiring content editors or content creators or content orderers. You want to make sure that their written English is of a high enough quality. So by putting all these barriers in, you're going to get some people that don't want to do the hassle. They want to take the Joe Magnotti or even Justin Cook approach where they shotgun, their application to like 50 different jobs. They're going to skip the ones that require kind of this detailed stuff and just go for the easy ones. That's fine. You probably don't want those people applying to the position.
Yeah, and I would also say just remember to track this kind of stuff, whether you're using a Google Doc or some sort of spreadsheet to track different layers and how far people came through each part of the funnel. That'll make it a lot easier for you to find out, how many people at each step you're filtering out.
All right, so let's talk about the second part of the hiring process. The first thing is to skip any applicants who didn't follow directions. So if you had Easter eggs and they didn't follow those directions, you can skip them. If you ask very specific questions, let's say, for example, that I said in the ad that I want someone who can start by October 1st, right? And then in the form I say, when would you be able to start? And it says, ASAP. It says sometime in September. It said I can't start until after October 1st or not for 6 months or longer, right? So those are the different 4 options they can choose. Anyone who chose October 1st or later or 4 months or longer are not going to be a good fit. They didn't read the ad. They didn't put together the fact that I need them to start before October 1st. So if they're saying, they're only available after that, those are people I can immediately reject. Right? If they didn't do the Easter egg, I can reject. If they didn't fill out the YouTube video when I required a link to their YouTube video for 2 or 3 minutes, I can automatically reject that person. So these are all barriers in the process. And the reason you do these barriers is because it is a funnel, there is a lot more people at the very top of the funnel. You may have 100 people or 60 people at the very top. If you had to sit down and do interviews with all those 60 people, it would take you forever. So what you're trying to do is avoid wasting your time at the top of the funnel and really spend your quality time at the bottom of the funnel. You want them to go through several barriers to the point that when they get to you, they're already much, much more qualified.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that's interesting because even if you took 5 minutes on each interview, which you're probably going to be longer than that, eventually you're going to find qualified people you want to talk to for a half an hour. I mean, 60 interviews at 5 minutes apiece would take you a very long time. So
and you'd be pulling out your hair. It would suck.
You need just a small handful of very qualified people that you're really looking for, more about fit than anything else when you interview.
Yeah, and this is important too. Of the qualified applicants, these are people that, they've already gone through the forms. They, met your Easter eggs. They filled out everything. They're clearly qualified, both in terms of filling out all the information, but also kind of their skill sets and what they're able to do. Now you've got qualified applicants. You're going to need to interview them live, right? And the best way to do this is in person, but if you can't do it in person because they're halfway around the world or whatever, then you should do it via Skype. And what this does, it allows you to kind of check their technology. If they're going to be working online, as they obviously are for your company, you're going to want to make sure that they know how to use Skype, that they have a fast enough internet connection to chat. Now, understand that depending on where they're at, the internet may be a little choppy. It may not be as amazing as you'd like it to be, but whether they have internet at all, I think it'd be helpful. Do they have a calm, quiet work environment, or are they surrounded by dogs and kids and craziness that would, distract them from their work?
Yeah, and I would say if the internet connection supports it, try to do a video chat. It's amazing the kind of feedback you can get just by watching a person. Your gut instinct is very good there at identifying if people are going to be a good fit and are going to be good to work with.
And now that you've gone through this entire process, you're sitting down to interview with them. A lot of our questions for interviewees are based around, are they a good cultural fit within our business? And what I mean by that is, do they seem like the kind of person that's going to give me feedback? Do they seem like the kind of person that's going to receive my feedback and do well with it, right? Are they the type of person I wouldn't mind sitting down and having a beer with? Or, could I spend, an hour, hour and a half at lunch with them without going crazy? Like, do we kind of get along, right? And I think that's a really important question, especially early on, right? If this is my first hire, my second hire, my third hire, it's going to be really important that we kind of get along and that we understand each other. And so that's the main thing I'm trying to figure out in the actual interview, because they're already qualified or mostly qualified, or they wouldn't even get to the interview, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that that's something that, again, you could pick up by body language and talking to them. In person would be great, but a video Skype chat is even better.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about training your team. Joe, we've gone into quite a bit of detail about this through other content, and so I should refer people to episode 17 of the Empire Flippers podcast, where we talk in depth about what we call the skill transfer process. Now, this wasn't actually ours. We borrowed this from a mentor of ours, a guy named Dan, for a company we worked for years ago, and he taught this to us, or skill transferred this to us, I should say. I think it's super helpful in getting your team up to speed. The idea when you're transferring skills or you're transferring ability, right, your ability to create Amazon affiliate sites successfully, right? The important thing here is you don't want any losses. You don't want any mistranslations. You don't want bad information getting passed from you to your hires. So that what you want to do is you want to get maximum value in transferring that skill. And this is a really good way to do that. It's basically a 5-step process. The first step is explain, the second is demonstrate, the third is practice, the fourth is observe, and the fifth is feedback. And we'll cover these briefly right now. So when you're transferring a skill to a new hire, someone on your team, the first thing you're going to want to do is explain the process, what it is they're going to be doing, how it works start to finish, and you can even get into why they're going to be doing this process or why you're teaching it to them. So it's important for them to understand kind of the why, but also for you to just kind of like go through detail by detail. The second step is you're going to demonstrate what that looks like or what the process is like. So by demonstrate, you're going to actually go step by step and have them look over your shoulder to see exactly how that process is done right? So they're going to see you doing it, and you're the expert because you've done this plenty of times before. And they're going to see you do one full and clear example of how it works. The third step is practice, right? And what that means is you're going to have them go through the process and do it step by step. And as soon as they make a mistake or if they forget what to do, you can step in. So it's okay for you to kind of like guide them along the way. And you're going to work with them really closely during this time. So what this might mean for keyword research is, you're going to have them talk you through it out loud. And you're going to stop them if at any point you see something that doesn't match and explain why it doesn't match, and then have them continue. By the fourth step, this is where you observe. Instead of stopping them at every single point in the process, you're going to allow them to continue to go through the process, make a note of it, and then come back to it. And by feedback, or the last step in the process, you're going to allow them to give you feedback on things that they thought were successful. It's an opportunity for you to kind of share your feedback with them and, where they're going and where they can improve.
Yeah, and this process has been used to train thousands, if not millions of people all over the world in the call center business, in the outsourcing industry, in our business. So we know it works. Big companies have used it. Small companies have used it. And it's absolutely applicable to these types of skills that you would use in building Amazon affiliate sites.
So once you've gone through the hiring process, you've brought your first 2 to 3 virtual assistants on board, or if it's a higher cost employee, maybe just one person, and you've actually trained them on what they need to be doing. You've taken them, through the skill transfer process. You're going to have them eventually be working on this process, and they're going to figure out new and improved ways to do things. What you're going to want to do is, as you're kind of going through this process with them, if you find something that's a little off or you find something that needs to change, you're going to want to go back and adjust your SOPs. And I found whenever you're training someone new, this is a great time to review SOPs, because you find new things when you go back through it. When you're training someone new, you're like, oh, I think we should change this, or, that doesn't seem quite right. So in the process of going through the skill transfer process with your new hires, you should also be running through your SOPs to make sure they're up to speed. All right, so we've talked about training your team. Let's get into managing your team. And before we get into this, I'll just quickly note that, there's some debate over whether or not you should be micromanaging your team. So is it too much to have screenshots of their computer when they're working? Is it too much to be documenting every single task and how many hours they're spending? Really, that's up for you to decide. I can tell you that for us, we do use tools like that with our team. We explain to them why it's important. For example, I want to know how many hours they're spending on particular projects because that affects, the overall company and kind of like where our costs are and what they should be working on versus what they shouldn't. And we just kind of explain it, and we think it's a fine way to work. So for time management, two of the things we work with our team is Time Doctor, which is basically a piece of software that kind of tracks what they're working on, can take screenshots, and allows them to assign themselves to particular tasks. So you may see in the last week, your virtual assistant spent 28 hours on keyword research and 12 hours on site setup. So it's a good way for you to understand what they're working on. The other thing that they should set up for themselves is rescue time. And basically, this is a piece of software that lets them see whether they're actually efficient with their time, or they're spending too much time on Facebook. And this is something we all use. Joe and I use as well, as does our management team.
Yeah, I would say, about the micromanaging question, I think it's a better, especially if you're new to managing people, to micromanage a little bit in the beginning and then back off from there as you get more comfortable with your staff and with your KPIs and parameters that you're measuring. These tools that we were talking about here, Time Doctor and Rescue Time, can really help you with that and to make sure that you're drilled down and looking at the right things. It doesn't mean that you have to look at every single screenshot that every person makes in a given day, but it does give you a good idea of where they're putting their time. And if their majority of their time is into going into a process that really doesn't make you a lot of money, then either you need to adjust the process so it's not so detailed and not so cumbersome, or maybe retrain the agent so that they know how to better and more efficiently do the process.
The second thing we want to mention is that it's good to follow the golden rule when it comes to managing your team. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Basically, this means treat them fairly, right? So consider it from their perspective. If you had you as a boss, what would you expect? And what this generally means is don't play with their money. Don't pay them late, right? Make sure that you're paying them on time. Make sure you're paying them up front. Make sure that they feel comfortable working with you. Don't give them unrealistic expectations, but make sure that you're utilizing them too. Don't leave them kind of bored. Otherwise, they're going to look for other projects or other people to work for, most likely. Just treat them fairly. And that's a fairly subjective piece, but I think it's important.
Yeah, and I think, again, this is something that comes with experience, but one of the biggest things you can do is pay. Don't mess around with their pay, and don't be late on it. Especially in the third world, it's extremely important that people are paid on time and as expected.
The other thing is, ultimately, you're going to be a boss, but you should also welcome critical feedback. One of the things we found, particularly in the Philippines, is that it's not culturally appropriate for them to give you negative feedback. So it's easier for them to say, yes, sir, or yes, ma'am, than it is for them to say, oh, this is broken. We need to get this fixed. And so one of the ways you can help to mitigate that is by really encouraging that feedback, giving them kudos when they do point out things that are broken or need to be fixed. And it took us, being honest here, it took us years to kind of develop this with our staff. So this isn't a quick fix, but as long as they understand that you're the boss, but that you are a boss that is open to feedback, I think that's particularly helpful with all staff, not just the Philippines, but particularly important in the Philippines.